Number 1. Let's start with probably the most famous instance of this, the T-800 in Terminator 2 Judgment Day. 1984 brought us The Terminator, James Cameron's low-budget sci-fi action horror hit. Requiring a hulking, intimidating, emotionless killing machine, Arnold was perfectly suited for the part and brought to life one of the most iconic film roles in history. Throughout the 80s, Arnold's roles didn't range farther beyond his previous ones, but once the 90s rolled around, things began to change. Some would argue that Kindergarten Cop was when Arnold's career took a turn for the family-friendly and forever tarnished his image. The addition of a teenage character into the mix could also provide evidence of the film aiming at a younger audience, along with Arnold's fame and near superhero-like perception of the time, all culminating in turning the T-800 from villain to hero.
Come with me if you want to live.
The creative team knew very well what they were doing, crafting the entire first act of the film to trick the audience into thinking it was a rehash of the first, all in service of flipping the script right when the action starts.
Get down.
While the movie does a great job at misleading the audience, the surprise was rendered moot when the trailers plainly stated that Arnold was now the good guy.
This time, he's back. For good.
Trust me.
Whether to get more people in the theater seats or just catering to Arnold's more tame image is anyone's guess, but the fact that Arnold hasn't played much of a villain since the 80s says plenty. Number 2. Next up is Benjamin Linus from Lost. Despite what some may think, the majority of TV shows are not planned out ahead of time. Television is improvisational in nature, changing things on the fly based on audience reactions, time and budget constraints, and sometimes the strengths of an actor, such as was the case with Ben Linus. Actor Michael Emerson was cast in the late Season 2 role of Henry Gale, originally intended to be a short multi-episode arc, but showrunners Damon Lindelof and Carlton Cuse very quickly saw what Emerson brought to the role in ambiguity, tension, and menace, and how well he played off of the other cast members.
You guys got any milk?
Not wanting to squander this opportunity, Lindelof and Cuse shifted gears and made Henry Gale actually Benjamin Linus. Ben's arc from bad to good is one of the more nuanced and organic changes on this list, as the change doesn't happen immediately and in fact takes most of the rest of the series to happen at all. We see how Ben's sad history with his abusive father Roger informs his controlling nature and his own abuse of power and manipulation of others, and his eventual power struggle with the even more villainous Charles Widmore. It's with Widmore's introduction and Emerson's surprising chemistry with Jorge Garcia's Hurley that Ben's arc begins to take shape. It's not until Ben gets his adoptive daughter killed that he starts to see the error of his ways, and Ben being knocked down several pegs paves the way for his eventual redemption by the series finale. Of course, it's not a smooth ride, and Ben makes some questionable decisions along the way. But these lapses in judgment are part of what makes the arc work so well. Change isn't sudden and complete. It's slow and messy, and might not take the first time or the second, making it all the more satisfying in the end when Ben is finally wanted and accepted. Number 3. Comic books have no shortage of bad guys gone good, but steering away from the superhero genre, because otherwise we'd be here all day, we have Negan from The Walking Dead. While the TV adaptation hasn't quite reached this point, the original comic book counterpart has surpassed his role as the big bad and onto the side of the angels. The change in Negan's loyalties is a case of both audience reception as well as the creative team getting a little too carried away, and it's one that doesn't work as well as intended. Negan first appeared in the comic's landmark 100th issue after considerable build-up as the worst of the worst, even though he'd be more at home in Mad Max than he is in the universe of The Walking Dead. Overnight, Negan became a fan favorite, injecting a much-needed and unexpected, unpredictable energy to the series that has been sorely missed at that point. Where Negan's arc falters isn't as much in his popularity, but in the misguided perception of him by his writers. Creator Robert Kirkman said of Negan early on that if we'd been following his story this entire time, we'd see Negan as the hero and Rick as the villain. While that's an admirable approach and a key ingredient to a great villain, here it simply doesn't track. Negan's first lengthy scene, which runs the entire length of the 100th issue, depicts him as a cruel, vulgar, and quite plainly, a bully. Where it falls apart is, aside from motivation alone, Negan is exactly the same as he's always been. He's still vulgar, he's still violent, he still takes glee from his terribleness and laughs at his own bad jokes. All of which says that he's still around because people love him and Kirkman loves writing him, and all of it plays more as a change to please the crowd than a true character arc. Number 4. Moving back into television, we get Al Swearengen from Deadwood, playing with bottomless charm and screen presence by Ian McShane. When the series begins, Al is, without a doubt, the bad guy, but it was also abundantly clear that Al was the highlight of the series and McShane's performance a major reason to tune in, even if he wasn't the main character at first. In the opening hours of the first season, Al's sending his men to murder a young child, and by the end we've seen Al weep at the sight of the local Reverend Smith, slowly dying from a brain tumor and eventually euthanizing him to put an end to his suffering, and McShane makes every moment count along the way. Much like Charles Widmore on Lost, Deadwood's writers began to filter much more heinous and threatening villains into the series, first with Francis Wolcott in Season 2, then his boss, the obscenely wealthy, powerful, and twisted George Hearst. Part of these characters and the Hearst organization's introduction serves to show that Al isn't the worst this world has to offer, but their goals for Deadwood informs Al's actions as well. It's debatable whether or not Al's actions are in service of protecting his own selfish interests that just so happen to align with the greater goal of the town's interests at that moment, or if he truly begins to care about the misfits and outcasts of Deadwood. His true feelings being blurry and occasionally at odds yet totally believable are a testament to the writing and one of the best television performances in history.
And here's my counteroffer to your counteroffer. Go f*** yourself.
Number 5. We'll wrap this up with the sole video game entry, John Marston from Red Dead Redemption. John Marston is an instance of the story picking up after the change in morality has already occurred, and one of the few entries on this list where the switch from bad to good is essential for the story to work at all. It's a classic tale of past sins coming back to haunt you, and the reckoning that comes along with it. The story picks up in 1911, past the prime of cowboys on horseback, and John is pulled back into the realm of outlaws and violence when a candidate for governor has his men kidnap John's family, forcing him to track down and kill the last remnants of his now insane gang to create a platform as the candidate who cleaned up the Wild West. Along the way, John comes face to face with the demons of his past, who challenge his choices and force him to struggle once again with a way of life he left behind, yet is still quite adept at living. Red Dead Redemption is also the only entry on this list to have a moral to the story of going from bad to good, as John Marston ultimately pays the price for his past. But what kicks the story up into tragedy and greatness is during the epilogue when his son Jack takes up the gun to avenge his fallen father, arguably damning him to the same life of violence that John gave his own life trying to get out of. Video games often get criticized for their excessive over-reliance and celebration of violence, and while that can occasionally be absolutely true, Red Dead Redemption is one of the best examples of a game taking that notion to heart and delivering a genuinely moving exploration of a life of violence and its consequences. And that's not even getting into the game's examinations of the rise of technology, the after effects of colonization, the invasion, eradication, and perversion of Native American culture, the fundamentals and abuse of capitalism, blind religious belief, or the simple tragedy of a new world leaving people behind.
Our time has passed, John.
There are endless characters who've gone through these shifts in morality over the years and across mediums, too many to whittle down into one comprehensive list. What do you think? Let me know in the comments, and be sure to check out my Choose Your Own Path horror game on the iOS and Android App Store. Links in the description. Thanks so much, friends, and I'll see you again soon.